Hello and welcome to Everybody Has a Story with Jeff Seltzer. I am your host, Jeff Seltzer. Once again, I'm really excited to have an episode this week. This is episode 20. We started back in, I think it was early to mid July. So we've made it 20 consecutive weeks with an episode, which is pretty exciting. When I started off this journey of the podcast for Everybody Has a Story with Jeff Seltzer, wasn't sure where it was going to go or how it was going to take us, but we are on episode 20. I believe today we're going to have guest number like 17 or 18, which for me, I'm pretty proud of, right? A lot of this started off with, it was a personal goal of mine to get a podcast off the ground, learn how to podcast, learn how to edit, learn how to publish, market, all that kind of stuff. And it's been a journey. 4 months in, it's definitely been a lot of work, but it's been a lot of fun. Last week's show was really exciting, where we had Jerry Percal talking about the college experience and getting into college. Coincidentally, this past week, I also had a college night at my daughter's high school. So a lot of what Jerry was sharing was super helpful to me personally, as I was, listening to the guidance counselors at my daughter's high school about what she's going to experience. So definitely helped out. Again, a huge shout out to Jerry for being on the show last week. Huge shout out to Marcus, her son, who also, was super helpful, super great guy, and for getting that conversation together. Reminder to everybody, if you are interested in finding out all you can about the show, check us out on Instagram at Everybody Has a Story Pod. DMs are open, so if you want to be a guest, feel free to shoot me a message through that. Please like, comment, and all the fun stuff with the Instagram page. Additionally, this show's YouTube page is Everybody Has a Story Pod on YouTube. Personal Instagram is at Seltzer77 for all things Jeff Seltzer. You can check me out at jeffseltzer.com. Additionally, for the show, if you want to be a sponsor, if you want to send me something, feel free to email the show at everybodyhasastorypod@gmail.com. Reminder to everybody, we are on all podcast platforms that I know are available, but you probably know that because you're listening or watching right now. So once again, we are video on both Spotify and YouTube. We are also on Amazon, Apple, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Castbox, Good Pods, lots of other places too. And somehow all these other podcast centers just kind of syndicate out and pull it in, which is really cool. Did fail to mention before, I am super thankful for all of you that do join the show on a weekly basis. If you're new to the show or just found the show recently, thank you so much. Hope you like it. Definitely, it's been a lot of fun for me. I've gotten a lot of great feedback from my listeners. One comment that I got this past week, which was, I thought, interesting, but I mean, a fair point, I guess, to call out. The person said, "Hey, Jeff, I notice very often you do reference or mention your age. We get it. You're in your late 40s and you're 47 years old. Why do you say that all the time?" It's a great question. So for me personally, it's a weird dynamic, right? So a lot of people that I know or people that I've heard of don't like to talk about their age. The older they get, I guess it's probably closer to a point in life that they don't want to think about. Or obviously, as we get older, our bodies do start to break down. For myself, reminding everybody my age and the point in life I'm at, I think is definitely helpful and definitely adds perspective to this podcast. If I did this podcast when I was 18 years old or 25 years old or even 35 or 40 years old, I would probably have a different perspective and it would come across in a different way. So I want to make sure that all my listeners and viewers, when they're listening, understand, this is obviously the mindset or perspective of a 47-year-old guy who's married for almost 20 years and has two daughters who are in high school. Very different than somebody who might be from, 25, 30 years old, not married, one kid, married, two kids, three kids, whatever it is. At the end of the day, I think my age and the point in life that I'm at definitely gives a different view. So you might disagree with what I have to say, but you might agree with what I have to say. So at the end of the day, I do think age is an important demographic to keep in mind. When I'm 75 years old, if I'm still podcasting, my view might change again as well. So regardless, just something to keep in mind. Like it or don't like it, I am 47 years old. I'm willing to accept it. I'm halfway to 90. I'm halfway to 94 years old at this point. So if I do live to be 94, I'm halfway there, which is exciting, I guess. So we'll see. Hopefully, knock on wood, I'll make it that old, and we'll see what happens. With that said, I did want to introduce my guest for this week. This week, I have Anthony York. Anthony, it's great to meet you.
It's great to meet you. Thank you for having me on the show.
Awesome. Thank you for coming on. So real quick, before giving Anthony an opportunity to introduce himself, I do want to shout out my friends Chelsea and Jay, both from the Orlando, Florida area. Friends of mine who I've talked about on the show before. I met them a bunch of years ago. Jay works down in a magical, let's say, Mickey land, and Chelsea does a lot of different things. Chelsea and Jay introduced myself to Anthony for this conversation. So a lot of great things about Anthony and some of the great work he's working through and trying to accomplish. So Again, shout out to Chelsea and Jay. With that said, Anthony, do you want to give a little bio on yourself? Who is Anthony York?
Hi, I'm Anthony York. So I've been a very big fan of animation since I was a little kid. I went ahead and did some competitions in high school that really fueled the passion for it. I ended up competing and winning a couple of competitions that really cemented that. So I went to school for it. I graduated and I currently also work for the Mouse Company. I'm trying to work my way up through that. But I love to tell stories. And that's really what I'm all about.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you sharing and thank you for coming on, Anthony. I really appreciate that. So, before getting into obviously your love for animation, all that kind of stuff. So, again, I believe we talked about earlier before we went on the air. You are originally from Tennessee. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm originally from Tennessee.
You were born there, grew up there, I assume?
Yes.
Got it. And then at some point in your life, you moved down to Orlando. Did you move there for the college Disney program, or did you just go to school in Florida, or kind of like what pulled you down to the Florida area?
So I moved down for school. I went to the Dave School, Digital Animation and Visual Effects. It's actually on the back lot of Universal. Um, so I got to learn there and also play there, as the words go.
Nice.
We got to do my final block, our project. We got to make a commercial for NASA, actually.
Awesome. That's really cool. Okay, so you went to school there, which was for things like digital and animation and all those types of fun stuff. And I assume you went there, did that with the view or the idea of eventually getting a role, either working for Universal or working for a studio of some kind. Was that kind of the track or kind of the goal that you had at that point?
The dream job was always Disney. I've loved Disney ever since I was a little kid. I was going to the parks ever since I was a little kid. I was hooked on all the movies. But more importantly, I was hooked on the behind the scenes of the movies. I loved watching how they would draw characters. I loved how they would create cameras just to do specific shots. Um, I was a big fan of Walt Disney. I was a big fan of creators and where they got their stories and where they pulled their inspiration from. And I looked up to those guys.
Awesome. That's really cool. So, and again, for those of you out there, and even for myself, I know very little about this terrain. So if I'm asking too many questions, that's probably the way that this is going to go. But from like an animation perspective, so you went to school, you did that kind of stuff. From an animation perspective, is it still like hand drawn animation, like old school Simpsons and Flintstones stuff like that, or is most animation that you work with and that kind of the industry works on now more, I guess, like computerized, like Pixar and such?
Most of it has been computerized. There's very little traditional 2D animation done nowadays. Not to say that there aren't exceptions, but most of them have some sort of, we'll say, gimmick in which it can be made a lot simpler.
Right.
Um, but a lot of what I learned at school was the 3D animation, and then I've mostly taught myself the 2D.
Nice. So, as of right now, you currently, as you said, work for the Mickey company. Do you have any like side hustles that you're working on in animation? Do you have, I guess, like even just personal hobby projects, or kind of like how do you keep yourself kind of occupied right now, like in animation, to kind of like hopefully eventually get to that kind of a role if that's what you're looking for?
So I recently created my own YouTube channel, and I'm trying to get out my work that way. But I recently took on a project for the last 2 years where I was trying to pay tribute to Kevin Conroy. He voiced Batman for 30 years, and he had a very deep impact on my life. So I thought a good way to memorialize and commemorate that was to write and storyboard a movie in his honor, and I sent it off to Warner Brothers.
Nice. So what does that process look like before we find out the results of it? So if like me, if I'm an animator, I'm doing something or storyboarding, and I'm like, hey, I'd love to get it to, like James Gunn or whoever is responsible for DC at this point. Like, is there a certain portfolio that you looked into that you have to put together, or kind of like what does that process look like?
So a lot of the official process is a lot more already in the industry. Because I'm not in the industry, I took some, we'll say, loopholes.
Okay,
Um, but I went off basic principles of people that have inspired me over the years. When Walt Disney was still alive and he was creating these things for the first time, he didn't necessarily do it by the book. He wrote the book.
sure.
So I had this idea and I believed in this idea enough that I was just going to try. So I sat there and took inspiration from Bruce Timm. He was one of the producers on the original animated series. He
Okay.
did a movie a couple of years ago, Batman and Harley Quinn.
Yep.
He storyboarded 80 to 90% of the movie before the studio even know he was working on it.
Wow.
And then he brought in writers and his whole team and everything else.
But to
And
that
so
point, he was, I assume, contracted with the studio going into that at that point,
yeah,
right? So he was an insider.
yes, he was an insider. He'd been working with the studio for years. The history of Warner Brothers Animation is actually very interesting. But he was brought on for the original creators because originally his project with Warner Brothers was Tiny Toons. That's what started the whole studio. Steven Spielberg wanted to make this little cartoon, and so Warner Brothers built the studio just for that.
Wow.
And after about a season and a half, he's like, "Yeah, I think I'm good. I think I can go back to that." So they're like, "We just built a whole studio. What are we gonna do?" So they started reaching out to see if they could get more projects, and one of those projects was Batman.
Right. Nice.
Um,
And to your point, I mean, Batman obviously has lived in multiple forms over the last, what, like 70 years at this point, right? Like Adam, everybody remembers the Adam West from the 50s and 60s, right? And then it kind of, there was the cartoon for years. There was obviously the Michael Keaton. There was obviously the Christian Bale. There was all sorts of different versions of it. Now it's the Robert Pattinson. So Batman's been alive in some shape or form, for decades at this point.
yes.
Yeah. Okay, so that happens. So then, to your point, okay, so you put together a portfolio of sorts and you submitted it to DC with the hopes that they would use your story, or did you want to get a job as an animator, or kind of like what was the goal of what you submitted?
So a little bit of both to answer the
Okay.
question. The long story on that was I drew up about 130 panels of storyboards to summarize the whole story as a whole. I then created a screenplay to outline the basic idea of what this could look like. We packaged it all up and we sent it off to Warner Brothers. We sent it off to Bruce Timm, Jim Lee, which is DC Comics. Michael Uslan, he owns the copyright to make Batman movies, and we
Gotcha.
sent it off to James Gunn since
Yep.
he's now in charge of making all of the DC films.
Yes.
We reached out as fans because we're not in the industry, and we claimed no rights to ever be able to touch this franchise.
Right. It's licensed, it's owned. In theory, you can't go off and do your own Batman thing because DC will own you at that point.
Correct.
Yeah.
But I believed in the idea enough that I was at least going to try. If it led to a job with them, fantastic. At the very least, I wanted to pay tribute to a man that I admired for years.
Got it. And based on that, what were the results? Like, did you get a response back? I assume based on the fact that you're still working for Disney, you probably didn't get the role, but kind of like what was the next steps or the after effects of that process?
It took a couple of months, but I only got one response out of all the people we sent it to. On behalf of the representatives of Jim Lee, so a nice little lawyer email from Warner Brothers
Of course.
saying that they don't take solicitation. So
Um,
not a no, not a yes, but we don't take solicitation.
so basically, it was a non-answer. It's basically like, hey, regardless of how great this might be, we just can't use it.
Correct.
Got it. So let me ask you this then, because I know in other worlds. So, for example, a few episodes ago, I had somebody who worked for WWE, World Wrestling Entertainment, and part of the audition process was they had to put together like a script or kind of like a long form story of like, hey, if they were in the role, how they would write the weekly televisions. Is this something that, even though, let's say, DC, for whatever reason, couldn't hire you or couldn't use your material, you can use this work that you did with other studios almost as like your portfolio, like your tryout, right? So, not saying this is the way to go, but sending it off to like Marvel or to other studios to say, hey, this is the kind of stuff that I can do. Not saying, hey, I'm trying to sell you a Batman comic, but like this is the level of quality. This is how I think, and this is what I could do if you were to hire me in some capacity.
Parts of it. There are definitely parts of it I could use. There are definitely parts I'd have to leave out because it is Batman and it is franchised and it's specifically Warner Brothers. But the fair use on doing fan art like this does speak to the testament of the project. I was able to create a little trailer, an animatic trailer,
Okay.
that showcased a lot of the storyboards that went into it. The difference between animation and animatic being that animatic is specifically storyboards playing out in a video, versus animation is just fluid.
Got it. Got it. What software do you use when you do stuff like this on the computer? Like, is there a certain like, I mean, I guess Final Cut Pro or iMovie is probably not it, but like, is there a certain software that like yourself or you've learned that the industry uses that you want to try to, obviously use as much as possible to kind of, get the best output possible?
I've used a lot of softwares over the years. I'm very skilled in Adobe, Maya platforms. For this particularly, I didn't have a lot of access to those kind of things at the time. So I've been using Autodesk Sketchbook and
Okay.
Wondershare Filmora. So that's the editing software I was using for most of this. Um, and everything else has just been doing it by hand.
Nice. Nice. So, knowing how that worked out, and obviously knowing that again, it wasn't a yes or no, it was, this isn't the right forum to try to get a job with DC. Have you been reaching out in other ways? Do you have other venues to try to get into, whether it be DC or other studios? What are the next steps for Anthony at this point in terms of trying to get into the industry?
Next step for me is I'm going to keep working on projects. I'm going to keep trying to appeal to fans because they recently launched a campaign for something else that somebody else pitched to Warner Brothers, and they've been trying to get an online presence to see if they would make the movie. I took a gamble and I went ahead and I created that animatic trailer and I created a little bio of why I created the animatic in order to see if I could get that fan response to see if I could change Warner Brothers' minds. Um, but for me, it's just going to be about perseverance and finding the project that'll finally land me that gig.
Got it. And what is your YouTube channel if you want to share that out to kind of share out some of the work that you've done?
So it's a 3 a.m. production at Anthony the Art Guy York.
And it's all one word, Anthony the Art Guy York.
Yep, and 3 a.m. production is also one word.
Okay, very cool. And those are two separate accounts that I guess house both of them. Is that correct?
So it's one account. You can find it either way. The
Okay,
name of the channel is the 3 a.m. production, but I have it linked under my Instagram, which is at Anthony at the Art Guy York.
got it. I'll try to remember to tag that when I post this show, so that way in the show notes people can find it when they see the information about that. So hopefully they can
Thank
easily
you.
see it. Hopefully they can look more into what you've done, other kind of stuff like that. Spread the word of what Anthony York is doing.
Well, thank you.
Of course, of course. So with that said, what else would you like to talk about? So I know, again, you're really excited about Batman. You've done a lot of great work with Batman. This is not the end for you. You're just trying to figure out like where else to go in the industry and what to do. Working in Disney, are there opportunities to move up the ladder, going like working from the parks to headquarters, right? Because Disney is obviously one of the bigger animated movie studios in the world. Like, is there an opportunity? Like, do you know the people? Is that kind of a journey for you to try to find the path? Like, what does that look like, if at all?
It is kind of a journey to find the people. A lot of the industry nowadays is about who you know, not necessarily what you can do.
Sure.
I'm trying to reach out and make those connections where I can. Over the years, I've always focused more on the art side of things than the socializing part of things,
Right.
and now I'm trying to compensate and do both. Um, the It's easy for me to be passionate about the art. It's a little harder for me to socialize in settings.
Got it. So trying to sell it, it's like you do great work, but trying to sell what you have is what your weakness, I guess, would be here in terms of getting to that next step.
Yeah, I am trying to get better at it though.
Got it. I assume, or I'm asking, I guess, like, are you in LinkedIn? Like, are you looking at other people to kind of like reach out, whether it be cold message or whatever, to try to at least find somebody who knows somebody? I mean, it is a small world, I would say. All it takes is to find one person that you're connected to who knows somebody who knows somebody. Like, is that a journey or something you're trying to do, or kind of like what are you doing to, I guess, try to find those avenues?
I keep so like I have the opportunities of like job postings pop up on Disney all the time. I specifically look for the art ones.
Right.
I've gotten close on a couple, just never made the final straw. But it is mostly about the perseverance of it. I mean, there's artists who have been doing this for years and years and years, and it is all about like what they're working on necessarily at the time and what their current projects are.
Right.
Because if your style fits, then they can use you. If your style doesn't fit as much, then they might not need you this time.
So with that said, I mean, you do have a lot of creativity, and obviously sometimes it's right place, right time, and some of the greatest artists in the world never get found because they just aren't in the right place at the right time. Have you thought about like self publishing or creating their own stuff? Like, I know Chelsea does a lot of work with publishing her own books, or she has some kind of format she does it in. Have you thought about figuring out like creating your own character, creating a comic book based around it, and trying to see like at the ground floor, if you can do that and kind of make some make some connections or get some success through that.
So it is funny you should mention that because how I really got into drawing and how I got into art. In fourth grade, I didn't have any friends, um, and eventually this exchange student he came and he could draw very well, and he also had no friends because he was new.
Mm.
I saw him drawing one day. I looked over and we struck up a conversation. We both loved comic books. We both loved art. We loved storytelling. So all of a sudden, we were creating these characters, and we made our own comic book company. And I had characters, he had characters. We would play with them on the playground,
Oh,
and he would draw them. I would come up with the stories.
that's great.
Fifth grade though came around, and he was more into sports and
Of course.
girls, and
Of
I
course.
was still into comic books.
Yep.
So I started like trying to emulate his stuff and trying to do it from muscle memory. And then once I could do his stuff from muscle memory, I tried moving on and went to YouTube. I went to videos that artists were posting and tried to copy and figure out how they were doing it and taught myself.
Right.
Um, when I got into high school and things, that was where it really took off because I started taking digital arts classes.
Okay.
I was trying to find a way to make comic books. I figured out, if I could get that in of like, how do they do this? How do they make these panels? How do they do this?
Right.
And that's where I started playing with animation. My teacher, she had this little software on the computers where you could animate stick figures.
Hmm.
And I would get done with all my work and I would sit there and I would play with it and I'd play with it. And by like the end of a week, I'd have like a 10-minute video of like stick figures that looked like the Avengers or the Justice League or
That's awesome.
Batman.
Yeah.
And she would play them in class. She thought they were so good.
Yeah.
We started competing in other subjects like video editing and digital arts, and we went to competitions that year. And the next year I was going to be a senior. She's like, what do you want to do next year? You're a senior, you get whatever you want. We started looking at the list.
Right.
Animation was on there, 3D. So I'm like, I know nothing. She's like, I'll loan you a laptop over the summer. You figure it out. Whatever happens, happens. So I went and I took it home and I started playing around with Blender, and started creating little figures and figure out how like to rig things and animate things. And we got the prompt for that competition in the fall when we came back, and it was create a Go Green commercial.
Oh wow.
And my teacher told me, there's no way you're gonna win, so just have fun with it. So I went into a room, I started storyboarding, sketching up rough sketches, and I did not go the typical route.
Okay.
I had bunnies take over corporate America because of pollution.
That's good.
And I was doing bunny voices, and other teachers were getting a little upset that they could hear me through the walls. So I had to tone it down a little bit.
Of course.
But we created this Go Green commercial, and when we presented it, we definitely did not win because of the animation itself. It was very new to all of this and very raw. But the idea that we came up with something outside of the box and that our audience wasn't necessarily just any average adult who was going to be watching the commercial or TV was we were trying to get the kids' reactions. We wanted the kids to relate to something that was going on in the world that if they cared, their parents would care.
Of course.
And we ended up getting second place. So we got invited to nationals, which was Anaheim, California. So we got to go to Disneyland.
That's pretty sweet.
So we got to continue competing there. And then that's really when I started going to school and we started learning how to do this stuff for real. I found out that everything I was doing was wrong. Got to learn the right way to do it. But sometimes that's how you learn is just running into it. Like, all right, this works. This doesn't work. It worked for what we needed, but okay, here's another way to do it.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I mean, again, like this podcast in itself, I taught myself everything about podcasting. I did get some help from other people, but for the most part, this is a one-man show. Like I don't have an intern. I don't have anybody. I'm doing everything myself. It wasn't until, I mean, it feels weird saying this. Wasn't until a few weeks ago that I realized that my audio was way too light because my microphone was too far away from my face. Like my first 15, 16 episodes, my audio didn't quite sound where it should have been. And people were like, somebody actually reached out, somebody who works in IT or tech in the company I work at who heard the podcast and was like, Jeff, you might want to look at the sound where your microphone's set up. You got a good microphone, but is it on or is it your Mac microphone or like what's working? So since then, I've put my microphone much closer. I actually have it propped up, and the last couple of weeks it sounded much better. So to your point, I mean, it's you just got to do it and try it and find out what you can, and eventually hope for the best and learn along the way. It's great.
Exactly.
It's crazy. So it sounds like you're definitely on your journey. You're just trying to figure out kind of how to get your foot in the door. Have you considered or thought about kind of taking your experiences and kind of a lot of the artwork that you've done and a lot of the talents that you have and trying to utilize that to, like, in the meantime, like help others, right? Like, so as an opportunity, maybe, I don't know. With online, there are ways to either teach classes or tutor, or Facebook groups finding like-minded individuals trying that are looking to learn this. And you can help them out with that, or kind of like, is that a venue you've looked at? Because you never know who you're going to find or run into who can kind of put you, I guess, connection with somebody else.
In part, that is kind of what I've been trying to do a little bit with my channel. I have been trying to set up my videos in a way that maybe people could follow along if they wanted to and draw along with me.
Yep.
I do little factoids and try to explain characters that I'm drawing and things like that as well. But I have tried to keep in mind that maybe some people would like to learn to draw as well.
Right.
Um, Down the line, I have some ideas for videos where I specifically just here's how you do this, here's how you do that. But I have tried to keep those things in mind going forward with it. I've been involved with peer teaching when I was in high school,
Nice.
and I really did enjoy that experience. I'm currently talking to my high school teacher. She has a student right now that is very much interested in animation.
Awesome.
And they've talked to me about possibly doing a tutoring session or two.
Nice.
But we haven't submitted any of that yet. Um, so right now I'm just trying to figure out how I can hone my skills and try to get my stuff out there and get the content out there and see if that can speak for itself in a way. And just keep moving forward.
Awesome. I mean, that's all we can do, right? I mean, life is tough. All we can do is, keep working as hard as we can, learn as much as we can until that right opportunity pops up or that foot in the door happens. I mean, it could happen early, it could happen late, it may not ever happen, right? But for us, just keep trying, keep pushing. And it sounds like you do have a lot of passion for this. You love doing this. So hopefully, you do find something at some point and the opportunity shows up. But in the meantime, it sounds like you're just kind of trying to help yourself get better. You're trying to kind of keep pushing yourself and keep trying to just spread the word, right?
Exactly.
Nice, nice. Anything else that you'd like to share about your experiences, about your interests, about like what you like to do, or about like what makes Anthony tick?
I would love to talk about the movie that I just tried to create. I
Awesome.
don't I shouldn't call it a movie because it's not official yet.
It's it's an unofficial movie
It's a
that
movie
is,
pitch. We'll go with that.
yes, there it is.
So this movie pitch started. So I've loved Batman for forever. My dad introduced me to it when I was a kid. I got into the animated series. That series is 30 years old now. The That show changed the way that animation was seen and heard ever since it was created. When they started filming it, they started filming it like a radio drama.
Okay.
So they would cast actors who had distinct voices, not necessarily voice actors, which was a very because you didn't have like Yogi Bear or Bugs Bunny.
Right.
You had voices.
Yep.
And one of those voices was Kevin Conroy. When I was a kid and I was growing up, everybody was, everybody asked me the question like, "Who's your favorite Batman?" And like they were looking for Michael Keaton, they were looking for Val Kilmer, they were looking for Ben Affleck, and I would always say Kevin Conroy, and their response without fail was always, "Who's that?" Like
Right.
the animated series, the Arkham games, this and that, and they're like, "No, no, 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 live action." I'm like, "Well, that's harder to pick."
Right.
Because for me, Kevin Conroy was and is Batman. The way
Sure.
that he defined the character was revolutionary not only for the time, but it's what all actors tried to recreate for themselves. He found the distinguish line between the character of Bruce Wayne and Batman. Because the thing that he understood about the character was Batman is not the alter ego. Batman is the true self. Batman is the place that he went to after witnessing the horror of his childhood. That is who he became.
Right.
He has a lot of heart in that. He's not all just going around beating the bad guys and doing pow and zam, and he cares about people and he wants to give back to the world. And the nobility of that mission is what everybody loves about Batman.
Right.
But the thing that Kevin Conroy understood was Bruce Wayne is the performance. Bruce Wayne is the suit of armor that he puts on for the world. And for a kid like me growing up, being at school and liking the things that I liked was not very popular when I was a kid. So to say that I was made fun of and teased is, we'll say that.
Yeah. So
Um,
real quick, on a side note, I mean, I can completely relate. I wasn't really as into the animated Batman. I'm a few years older than you are, so I'm not sure it really was a thing when I was a kid. But I've always been a professional wrestling fan, which comes and goes. But when I was growing up, I was that lone wrestling fan who would wear wrestling T-shirts to school and stuff like that. And it wasn't always easy to be that guy. So I get the fact that it's oftentimes weird or tough growing up, being very interested in like a very niche or very targeted thing that nobody around you gets. Completely
exactly.
understood. Yeah.
So for me, Batman was that safe place that I could go to. That I needed to find a way to make my Bruce Wayne, my that suit of armor that I could put on at school, and but still secretly care and still do all the things that I could do, maybe behind the scenes, and still help everyone that I could.
Right.
Um, Having that sense has given me a very strong moral compass in growing. It was something that I looked up to. It's something that I strived for. And if it wasn't for Kevin Conroy's performance to make that real, the gravity that he put into the voice, he took a lot of his own personal life experiences, which everybody can relate to some sort of trauma in their life,
Of
some sort
course.
of bad thing that happened. And the difference in the Batman comics and the cartoons and everything was there's a very common line of it all it takes is one bad day. And the meaning of behind that was you can either let a bad day define you in the negative or the positive. And I've spent my entire life trying to turn anything that was negative into that positive and taking that pain and doing something good with it. And that's all that Batman is. That's all that Kevin Conroy was.
Right.
Um, he brought that authenticity to the voice that you could hear it in the different levels. He had so many levels to his Batman voice whenever he was acting. There's an episode that he did that he loved doing where he voices 4 different characters. Some of them are the same character, but they're different. He voices Batman Bruce Wayne. He ends up in a dream sequence where he then voices his father, who has passed away, but in the dream, he's alive and well. He voices Dream Bruce Wayne, which is very different than his regular Bruce Wayne, and he plays Dream Batman.
Okay.
Now, those last two are the distinguishes here. Is he takes out all of the sense of heroism. He takes out all of the sense of there's a goal, there's a confusion to it of like, what am I supposed to do with my life? The Batman, he takes out all of the humanity in its voice. And those two have to talk to each other.
Right.
So he's having that internal monologue, not just as Batman and Bruce Wayne, but with himself. Um, and it just brings such an impact to me watching this as a kid of like, everybody struggles with their internal monologues all the time. And that's such a real emotion to put into that voice that we thanked him for it.
Definitely.
When I grew up, and I've been a fan for forever, somebody got me a cameo video from him,
Oh,
and
nice.
it's one of my favorite presents. They actually sent him. Over the course of years, I'll draw something, and I think it looks really good at the time, and I'll get it printed, and I'll put. I'm like, all right, this is what I did. Let's come a couple years later, and like, let's see what I do then.
Sure.
Um, and this is about 2 years old at the time that I had drawn that I got the cameo video, and somebody had sent him a picture of this drawing that I had on my wall, and it was from the animated series. It was from one of my favorite episodes. I was trying to teach myself how to ink things like comic books at the time, and 2 years later, I didn't think it was that good. Um, but he saw it, and he in the cameo video, he starts talking to me about the artwork. He
Oh,
starts
wow.
personalizing that to me of like where the show started, like how they painted things on black backgrounds and the animated cells that went into it, how he loves collecting cells, so he can relate to that. He even sent an email attached to the cameo video having some very nice compliments from me about my art and that he couldn't wait to see my name on the big screen someday
Oh,
and that my attention to detail was terrific. Um, and the fact that Batman believed that I could do it, when he passed away, it hit me really hard because that was my Batman.
right.
And I I knew it was a long shot trying to go into it, but it took me about 3 months to do 130 panels. I spent every free time that I had to create those panels because of everything that he meant to me growing up.
And that was your inspiration to then putting together the portfolio you had that you sent over to DC
I
that you
did.
mentioned earlier, right?
I went about creating that story. In the cameo video, there's actually parts of the cameo video that I was able to, because one of the goals with this story wasn't just to make a Batman movie. It was to create that everyone experiences loss, everybody experiences pain, but you can still do something with it. You can still go through the stages of grief and not let it destroy you. And
Right,
that it was something that Conroy stood for immensely. So putting that in the Batman movie and making that the theme was something that I thought would be a very good tribute to him and his life, not just to Batman.
right.
So there was a scene that we constructed where obviously he's passed away, so he can't record any lines. But I took a play out of Disney's book. When they did get a horse, they have Walt Disney voice Mickey Mouse again. Obviously, he wasn't around to voice any of that, so they
Of
took
course.
all of the old dialogue
Yep.
and rearranged it. The only word that they couldn't come up with was red,
Ah.
so they had to stitch together syllables. So I took 30 years worth of content plus my cameo video, and I came up with one final speech that I thought would be something that Conroy would say, that Batman's Conroy would say,
Of course.
um, to really cement the whole idea of the movie pitch and everything else.
Right,
But the idea that Batman couldn't voice anything, but the story was still Batman, was the challenge, but also it was very easy to do because of the impact not only Conroy had on the character in my life, but all of the characters that Batman would interact with.
right,
We could implement that story in a way that everybody could kind of have like, well, all right, the loss of a father figure, the loss of a mentor, the loss of somebody that you knew that has inspired you, but you don't know that well.
right.
So we were able to take all of that and put it all into one movie that we hoped everybody would be able to relate to that. When we were about making the screenplay, we were just kind of hoping to drag out of like, hey, here's 130 panels. This is just the summary.
Right.
Thousands of storyboards go into making one of these films.
Yep.
And it was just a passion project, and it was a story that I wanted to tell on behalf of Conroy for the impact he had. When I made Eagle Scout, he actually sent me a congratulation letter.
Nice.
It was one of my favorite letters that I got. But he sent it as himself and Batman. He actually sent me an art print from the show.
Oh, nice.
I was the first Eagle Scout that ever. So how that works is your parents and your scoutmasters, they reach out to people like, hey, this kid has made the Eagle Scout. Would you say something?
Right.
And my parents reached out, and he sent back the art print and everything else. I was the first one to ever ask for
Oh, wow.
one. And just having that, it just really cemented that I had accomplished something of like, holy crap, Batman took notice.
So I mean, that's really awesome. So again, for those listeners out there, I'm sure you're definitely feeling just how much of an impact the Batman animated series, and specifically Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman for the series, definitely had an impact on Anthony's life, right? So Anthony had said, Anthony was able to kind of relate to a lot of it. I mean, we can all relate to the fact that in lives, sometimes we wear a mask and aren't who we are. But what really hit me was the fact that, and I love this call out that you had, that most people look at Batman and think Batman is the alter ego because that's the mask, that's somebody else, versus Bruce Wayne is the everyday guy, but it was actually the opposite. Definitely never heard of or thought about that perspective, but I love it. Right, it's definitely very different, but I can completely get it. Like he can do good things as Batman, he can do a lot of things saving lives, he can do all sorts of stuff, and then Bruce Wayne is kind of his facade or his fake life, as you can say. So that's really intriguing. It makes me think about that one. So thank you for bringing that up, Anthony. Appreciate that.
Thank you for listening.
Of course, of course. So we are getting later in the show. Anything that you'd like to promote, Anthony? So I know you mentioned earlier your YouTube page, which is at, say it again, please.
A 3 a.m. production, all one word, at Anthony the Art Guy York. So that's the little hashtag underneath it.
Awesome. If anybody out there has any opportunities for or need an animator, like do you do like ad hoc animation projects, or are you more looking for kind of like the big leagues for a role? Like if somebody was like, hey, I'd love to get a video of X or animation of Y or whatever else like that, are those types of like, do you do side jobs or not really?
I've taken on commissions before. Obviously this was my passion project, and I put a lot of time into that.
Of course.
I haven't done a lot of commissions, but I am open to commissions. I am trying to get into a studio. I'm trying to create and do this not just for a living, but it's. I've always believed that if you love doing something, you do it for free. Now, obviously, you can't buy groceries on free,
No,
but
you can't.
I would do it for free, and I've proved that 10 times over with everything that I've done. So anything I can help with, any projects that I can undertake, I just like doing them. But now I've gotten to the point in the talent and the creative side that I actually want to do this. Like I want to work with people and do it, and
Right.
be in the studio and like work on a movie or work on a show or a commercial or whatever.
Yep.
It's just finding those stories worth telling is such
So
a fulfilling thing.
absolutely. So if somebody wants to reach out to you, is Instagram the best way? Is Facebook? Is YouTube? Gmail? Like, how should somebody reach out to you if they were interested in a commission, or if somebody out there was like, "Hey, this Anthony sounds like a pretty cool guy. I'd love to hire him for something." Like, how would they get a hold of you?
My Instagram is at Anthony the Art Guy York. Facebook is just Anthony York. I think YouTube you can exchange comments and things of that. That would be a perfect way. My email, although it'd be a little long, is
I,
Anthony York,
do you
one
want
word.
do you want to publish that out? I'm not sure if you want to get spam or whatever. Are you okay putting your email address on the podcast?
Um, I don't see why not.
Okay, go for it then. It's all you.
Are we going to edit this part now?
No, this is going live. We're going as is, so it's up to you if you want to put it out there. Just for anybody listening. So I do advertise that my email address is at everybodyhasastorypod at gmail.com. That's not my personal email address because the amount of random spam that I get from, let's say, nonsensical companies, I get quite a bit of. So I try to be a little more protective of what email address I broadcast on the podcast. But it's up to you, whatever you're comfortable with. This is probably one of your first times doing this. So just want to make sure that you're aware of the pros and the cons of putting your email address on a podcast.
This is my first time doing it. Maybe I'll leave it for another time.
Okay, Instagram is probably the best way to reach you. Your DMs, I assume, are open. They could probably either comment on one of your photos or they can send you a DM and get a hold of you that way. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Awesome. We'll do that. Lots of great work there. So, Anthony, thank you so much for joining the show. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank
So,
you.
of course. So, once again, I want to thank all of my listeners for joining. Again, if this is your first time listening, thank you so much for finding it. We do have a lot of great episodes in the past that you should listen to. This is episode 20. So, we have 19 other episodes that you can check through. If you have any feedback on any of the episodes, or if you want to be a guest, please go to Instagram at Everybody Has a Story Pod. Send me a DM. Let me know what you want to do. Let me know what you want to talk about. We'll see what we can do. Reminder also, the email address for the show is at everybodyhasastorypod at gmail.com. My personal Instagram is at Seltzer77. For all things Jeff Seltzer, you can check me out at jeffseltzer.com. Tell your friends, your neighbors, your cousins, your mom's cousins, your cousins' neighbors, all that kind of stuff about the show. The more people that listen to it, the more, just gets the more, right? So just like, comment, follow, all the fun stuff. With that said, hope everybody's an amazing week. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll have either a guest or a solo pod for episode 21. Take care. Talk to you soon. Bye.